What up, Internet? This is the introduction episode to a podcast series I'm starting on the history of Portugal. I decided to do a podcast on the history of Portugal after becoming heavily addicted to history podcasts myself. It seems like you can type history of blank and whatever subject you fill the blank with, you can get a 100-episode podcast series about. But when I tried to find a podcast about the history of Portugal, I came up blank. So I decided to make one myself. I may not be as well informed as your college history professor, but I will try to convey these topics in an understandable way. This podcast will be conducted chronologically, but we will be at times stopping to take a more narrative perspective where I think we can. Because at the end of the day, history is about the people. As I've never really done anything like this before, I'm sure it'll sound pretty stiff and awkward. I apologize for that, and hopefully I'll be able to get past it as I make more of these episodes. Typically, I'll be shooting for episode lengths of about 20 to 30 minutes. With this being an introduction episode, I'll cut it short and try to keep it at about 5. Now, I suppose, is a good time for a brief overview of what we'll be covering during this podcast series. Author H.V. Livermore, in his A New History of Portugal, defines the physical land that is Portugal in a very precise way that I like, so I'm going to quote it to you here. Quote, "The metropolitan territory of Portugal consists of the Atlantic seaboard of the Iberian Peninsula from the mouth of the Minho to that of the Guadina. Its area is 34,216 square miles, or 88,684 square kilometers. Its greatest length is about 350 miles from north to south, and its width varies between 70 and 140 miles. In addition to this mainland territory, metropolitan Portugal also includes the adjacent islands of the Meiras and the Azores. First settled in the 15th century, the 11 inhabited islands have a total area of 1,192 square miles, or 3,088 square kilometers." End quote. So that's a very literal definition of the modern borders of Portugal. So I guess the question that learning the history will really answer is, how did we arrive at these modern borders? I have in front of me here a children's history of Portugal by Sergio Luis de Carvalho, illustrated by Antonio Salvadaro, translated by Ines Lima. If I'm getting these pronunciations wrong, by the way, guys, I'm really sorry. I'm by no means an expert in the pronunciation of Portuguese. I'm actually learning Portuguese right now, but I'm pretty sure it's Brazilian Portuguese. It's kind of a sidebar. Anyways, without getting too distracted, I have this book in front of me because I really like the way that it breaks down the different time periods that Portugal went through. So I'm just going to read off essentially the names of the chapters. Well, some of the chapters anyway. So, the Lusitanians, which were kind of like the first people to inhabit the area of modern-day Portugal. Then the Romans. Then the Visigoths came. Then the Muslims came. Then started what is called the Condado Portucalense. Then there was the Alfonso Henriques, the first king. Then they began to voyage out into the Atlantic, along the coast of Africa, discovering a maritime route with India. Then we'll probably get into Portuguese people in Asia. Then we'll head over to Brazil. And then after this golden age of Portuguese exploration, they begin to lag behind the other nations. For a time they are occupied by Spain and eventually restore their independence. Portugal tries to develop. There's an invasion. There's a revolution, a civil war, a new Portugal is born. They focus on development once again. They end their monarchy. They start a republic Salazar makes a dictatorship, they end the dictatorship, then there's a democracy, and now we're here. We're back where we are in recent years. I just lightly went into the chapters. There's a couple I left out. It's a good kid's book. It obviously doesn't go into the more gritty minutia that I'll touch on in this podcast, but if you have kids and Portuguese heritage, it'd be a great book to get. I know that I really haven't gotten into too much yet, but this is just an introduction. So next week, on Wednesday, we'll get into the real meat and potatoes of the first episode when I talk about the prehistory of the region that is Portugal. Which, and a lot of this stuff, it's going to end up kind of just talking vaguely about the Iberian Peninsula because we don't have records of exactly where Portugal was to the degree that I wish that we had. But we will make do with what there is. So I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. And I thank everyone for bearing with me. Until then, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you for watching.